Well, hi. This is a one-page impression uh, by the final boss. So essentially what we're doing is this is a Twitch reward. So Burn to Ash has watched our Twitch stream many times and chatted and communicated and said hello. And so he's redeemed some of his channel points today to have a quick one-page impression of one of the projects he's working on. So here we go. I'll go through it fast, and I can go in a little bit more detail a second time. The human mind can do anything. For example, I believe that I am now in a world created by a young teenager, a version of myself from over 10 years ago. However, that does not explain why I believe that I am that child, nor why the moon suddenly became green and cleared my eyes. Sadly, I roamed around and encountered many more oddities, like blue grass and even yellow cow, toward the outskirts of whatever village graced my presence. That was the world I created as a child who had just started writing, a creation of a mind who did not know the economics or how the world worked. But before I could gather more information, a blonde woman approached me and yelled, "Honey, where have you been?" There was no one around me, and the blonde woman's belly suddenly stood out as if she was calling me honey. Does that make me the father, or was I as crazy as she was? I glanced at the woman and said, "Huh? Who are you?" However, the blonde woman flicked my head and said, "Just someone whose husband is roaming around the village like a headless chicken. Care to explain?" I questioned, ever wonder why the grass is blue and the cows are yellow? This question would confirm if something was wrong in my eyes or if it was truly the world I created as a child. My blonde wife confirmed it. No, I'm busy making a baby. I don't care about the color of cow food. Okay, so first brush on this is I think there's probably a few different things to think about, right? Like I think the idea of, I'm suddenly getting transported into another world is is a cool concept, right? And in this world, I have a wife who is not aware of this change. I think a fish out of water concepts and these fish out of water stories where a consciousness is brought into a new place. They always have a lot of potential and a lot of directions you can go, right? Um, a few things to think about is I would say that there is a little bit. So there's a few kind of challenges. One is the character's credibility. So do I really buy the character's emotional experience? And then two is just probably prose and page level execution that I would think about as you go about revising this page. So first, the character's credibility, right? And there's probably two things to think about here. One is showing versus telling, right? And we've talked about this when you've asked questions on stream. When is it okay to show versus tell, and vice versa? Um, I think in this case, someone waking up, because we're in the moment here of this person realizing that they're in a world they created as a child and they're living in this fantasy world that they wrote. Um, this kind of writing meta stuff is generally tough to pull off. So just a separate caveat there that it's very difficult to execute in a way that feels authentic to the reader because it always feels a little bit artificial, right? Because your main character is aware that not only is the world artificial, but they've created themselves the artifice that they're living in. That's a side note to think about. What direction you want to go with that is kind of up to you, but it's a tougher type of story to pull off. But in terms of are we showing versus telling when we're getting dropped into this person's consciousness, we're getting a lot of summary, right? I'm hearing that this is the world I created as a child. The only evidence that I get in terms of his sensory experience is really just sight, right? We have a mention of bluegrass and a yellow cow and a village. So if you're thinking about how am I bringing the reader into this moment, the way that we experience moments in our lives, right, is through our five senses and thought, right, which is kind of like in some ways auditory because it's heard. You sometimes almost can listen to yourself think about things, and it's almost like a little dialogue going for some folks. Um, but we're really only getting one sense, which is sight, and then we're jumping straight to the conclusion, right? Um, you know, we're jumping from I see bluegrass, yellow cow. This is absolutely the world I created as a younger version of myself. So that breaks the character's credibility, right? Because me as a reader, I know that if suddenly, no matter what I wrote as a child, I mean, I don't remember most of the things I wrote as a child, but no matter what I wrote as a child, I would first be in shock of the suddenly new environment. So I would want to feel my pulse increase, right? That would be a sense input in terms of, hey, I'm feeling anxiety. My pulse is like, my fists are clenching. My face is getting warm because I'm, just like kind of freaking out. Um, I'd want to hear strange sounds. I'd want to the first thing that person would do rather than introspecting, rather than saying, aha, I know what this is, it is XYZ, is very likely that they would try to investigate further, right? That character might drop to their knees and like look at the grass and it's like, is this some sort of science project? Like, what's going on? So those types of actions, because they're not happening and we're jumping straight to the conclusion, it makes this character feel a little bit inauthentic, right? Because we all are, as readers, we all generally know how we would react, at least in a given situation. And part of being a writer is generally estimating, given this set of circumstances, what would an average person kind of do, right? And for characters, that could be like, hey, given the sense that they grew up in a, wealthy home, they might be more willing just to drop some money on a nice new car, whatever. Versus someone who grew up in a impoverished home might not, that would be out of character for them to just drop a bunch of money on something. So in this thing as well, right? We don't have as much context. We don't know, hey, this person's background, which is okay. We're not supposed to at this point, but the reactions in that need to be very, very, very logical, right? So if I'm getting dumped into, hey, bluegrass, yellow cow, the immediate thing that character's doing is going, at least if it was me, I'd be like, what is going on with this grass? I would start messing with it and like looking at the cow and like trying to see if it's paint and like what is going on. Like so that reaction. So, right, it's sensory input, sensory experience. Show me what he's seeing, show me what he's smelling, tasting, hearing. Like, make me feel it. Describe it so vividly I feel it, and then have that character react, and then do something out in the world, and then they get more sensory feedback, and then they react and do something out in the world, and they get more sensory feedback. So that's kind of the interaction between showing and telling you generally that can be a good tool to have in your tool belt. The other thing I will say is as you go about revising is to look at the pros and to say, okay, how do I bring out um, the core of the story without having too many extra words and too much distraction? So, for example, I questioned, ever wonder why grass is blue and cows are yellow? So again, at the pros level, there are probably a few things to think about even in that line. One is you don't need I should have put track changes on, darn it. But here, I'll just do that here. You probably don't need this extra thing I questioned, right? And the reason is, I'll scroll down so you can actually see, the reasoning there is the dialogue has a question in it. So that becomes verbal doubling. You know, you would want to aspire to trust your reader as much as you possibly can. Like a lot of writers' goals is to really give the reader enough information for them to construct a scene in their imagination and no more, right? So we already have a question written here. We don't need more detail. And that's one of the reasons showing is so important with evocative details, right? Like if I know what I'm feeling, touching, tasting, if the reader has that data, it's much easier for them to construct that artificial reality in their imagination. Ever wonder why the grass is blue and cows are yellow? So again, the dialogue here feels a little stilted. Um, so like, cause she says, "Care to explain?" And he's like, "Well, do you wonder why the grass is green?" Um, And also like the dialogue feels a little funny. Like, no, I'm busy making baby. That's generally not. That would not be what I would expect a kind of normal person to say, right? Because she's stating a fact that's obvious and known. Like, hey, she's pregnant. She's coming in pregnant. It's pretty obvious she's making a baby, right? So, um, I don't care about the color of cow food. That's kind of a funny, phrasing she's using, like a funny line. But again, like there's probably a lot of cutting that you can do to really sharpen and get to the core of some of what you're bun in the oven. Yeah, get to the core of some of what you're trying to do. Overall, a cool concept. I think this is a fun conceptualization, a really interesting take on, hey, someone getting brought into their childhood story, where there is that fanciful aspect of it being a childhood story where there's things are different colors and it's much, it kind of has that more fanciful nature. I would be curious, if you're dropping me into a story in media res like this. So right, we're not getting this person's backstory. We don't know anything about this character before this moment. Um, that there are pros and cons to starting it that way. So just try to think through, hey, what are your goals? What are you trying to, where you eventually want to take this character? And hopefully that'll help you decide, hey, should I give a little bit of backstory in his normal world before he is thrust or she is thrust into the magical world? Or do I just start with the magical world and this person trying to get their bearings? But remember, if you're going to start with the magical world, we probably will just need more context, more sensory experience just to experience it because we, the readers, are getting thrust into the magical world as well. And yeah, that's a pretty quick summary, but hopefully that's helpful. I think this is a pretty cool concept, and I can't wait to see what you do with it. Good luck with your revisions, and take care.